I think in talking about with the other, we're trying to emphasize doing something together more as a partnership and less as the expert and the non-expert, but to try to flatten that hierarchy so that the professional, quote, and the person who comes to the professional for help can be on a more rather than less equal level. So with means doing something jointly, doing it together, so that one person is not doing it for the other person. And when you're doing it together, the client or the student has more of a voice, more participation in creating what the outcome, the resolution, or the solution is. And they have more of a sense of an ownership of what that is. And I think when you have more of an ownership, I don't know about you, Diana, when you have more of an ownership, I think in creating something that it has more sustainability.
I think it becomes the client's idea and not the therapist or the helper's idea, and that creates the ownership and the sustainability.
I would say that it's the same, that it's always there, and it's such a natural, spontaneous part of who we are and how we are with other people that perhaps we don't think about it purposely all the time. The one thing that I do more over the last few years than I did when we first developed the concept of not knowing is to emphasize that it is a concept and not a skill or a technique. But it's a concept that has to do with the way one thinks about knowledge, the construction of knowledge, the intent with which one offers, or the tentativeness in offering what you think you might know, and the attitude, the timing, the manner in which you offer what it is that you think is your knowledge or your expertise.
And I think for me, it's sometimes hard to maintain when I'm with a bunch of experts in my field. And so I know I'm not doing it when I start giving advice and certain, then I go, oh, wait a minute, I've lost that position of being curious of not knowing what they are thinking. I'm more worried about what I am thinking. So I have to shift back and forth with that after 30 years still.
Well, I think there are always cultural differences. And when I think in terms of culture, I think of culture in the broadest sense, not only in terms of a national identity, in terms of culture, but also the more local culture of a particular city, a town, a community, a rural village, an organization, a workplace. Each has its own culture, and that it's important to respect that there are differences within any of these cultures, and how one can learn about those differences, those uniquenesses. That's one of the things that I think about.
No, I agree, and I can think of times when I haven't been sensitive to that, and like in Cuba, and found out later that I presented something not in the best way because I was doing it like I did it in the States, but they were very nice. Shared that with me.
If I could just back up one moment to go back to part of your question, which I think we didn't address directly, about the differences in Latin American countries. I think it's really important not to think that all Latin American countries or all Spanish-speaking people are the same. That's very, very important. Okay. Dialogue. I think I'm heavily influenced, I know I'm heavily influenced by Mikhail Bakhtin's idea that we are dialogical beings, that we live, we communicate, we think, we emotion, we feel through dialogue. And by dialogue, I mean any way, any manner in which we try to express, articulate, talk with ourselves and others. So it's not just spoken or written words, or words perhaps rolling around in our imaginary mind, but it can be any way in which we try to communicate, that we live with each other in that way, through dialogue. And that I think it's also within dialogue that we get stuck with ourselves and with others, and that we can also be able to be free of some of our prisons.
I was thinking in some of your earlier articles you talked about we're meaning-making creatures, and so the way to express our meaning is through dialogue. Because otherwise it's in your head, which you're still doing. So the dialogue would be to understand the other's meaning, that your meaning changes in the dialogue as well.
And then again, the meaning can be expressed in terms of words, a bodily movement, a sigh, or just a physical feeling we have within ourselves. So I think, for me, the first place to start is to not think in terms of verbal and nonverbal. That's kind of an inherited discourse, an inherited tradition that's very important in most psychotherapy approaches. But that what I'm assuming that you're referring to as nonverbal, it's our nonverbal, it's a way of communicating. What's important is not to fall into the trap of having an interpretation, a silent interpretation or assumption about what someone's shrug means, or rolling their eyes, or they're sitting like this. Yeah. To be very careful of assuming that I know what he is thinking by standing like this. Okay.
It's a long question.
Yeah, but just to highlight some, is that we are meaning-making, knowledge-making humans, and we do that with each other. And that to always try to have an awareness of those knowledge systems or those knowledge discourses that we live and work in, and what part of that is influencing us, and how what we take from those various knowledge systems or discourses can be useful, can be relevant, or permit us to do what we would like or hope to do, versus get in the way or prohibit us from doing certain things. So in other words, the influence that knowledge has on us.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add to that, for me, is to try to live with uncertainty, with the not knowing, like not knowing where it's going to go, and being comfortable with that, which opens up all the possibilities.
That's very, very important. Very important.
And like not pulling someone like you showed earlier, or pushing them a certain way.
And it connects, it reminds me of an example related to your question earlier, Diego, about Latin American cultures. Is that some years ago, probably 20 years ago now, we had a psychiatrist from a Latin American country at the Institute spend a year with us. And he was having a very, very difficult time with the notion of uncertainty. And the notion of not being the expert. Because he kept saying, in my country, people come to the doctor, people come to the psychiatrist because they want an answer. They come to me as the expert, and I have to be the expert. I have to act like the expert. And he came, I guess, maybe like the end of August, and he struggled with that, and there were lots of conversations with him and the faculty and between him and other learners who were there. And in December one day he came in and he was just smiling, and he just looked so happy, and he was kind of walking like this. And I said, "What's going on? What's happened? You look so happy today. You look like you're really thinking about something or enjoying something." And he said, "All of a sudden I woke up this morning and I've decided I like uncertainty." I said, "What? Tell me more." And he said, "I decided that being able to be uncertain gave me a lot of freedom. And it gave me the freedom to be certain when I wanted to be." But he had really struggled because, again, in his culture, he had to be certain, he had to have the answer. Because people come to the doctors and say, "Tell me what's wrong, tell me what to do."
How much medicine?
Yeah, give me the medicine. And he said, "I can't just talk with them." Well, of course, we weren't suggesting he just talk with them. We were talking more about the way he would talk with them. I think in a situation where you have so many participants, first of all, how can you have content, material that relates to as many of the participants as possible, rather than bringing a video of something that's already happened? So you're trying to focus on their interest, the participants' interest, or the interest that most of the participants have expressed. You're drawing from their own work, their own experience. I ask for more than one volunteer so that we have as many people as possible participating. And then when you invite a reflecting process, you're inviting even more people. You engage more people to have more of an intimate experience with what we've been talking about.
We use it a lot in training at the Institute in Houston. And I think, like you said, it invites more ideas, and the clients, of course it's a longer process than we did here, the clients love it because it just has more ideas, and often someone watching the process has a very different viewpoint than me talking to the client. And sometimes someone on one of the reflectors will say something that I think is, oh, that's terrible, the client will hate it, and it's the thing that helps them the most. That happens a lot, so yeah. So it's a very enriching process, I think.
And really makes you be aware that you cannot have your interpretation of another person's interpretation or connection or disconnection with what they've heard.
But did you talk much today about entertaining multiple realities simultaneously?
No.
Yeah, and that's something that the team helps do, that there are many ways to look at a problem, none necessarily wrong. It's whatever the client feels is useful to them.
And sometimes we do what we call as-if reflections, where we might have asked people to reflect as if they were a client of the two volunteers. And if you were sitting here listening to your attorney or your worker talk about this situation, what would you like to say now? What thoughts have you had about it? So it's a way of just bringing in multiple perspectives.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, and something that I do think about. I think it has to do with creating a support for the ideas and the practice, but not necessarily to continue exactly as I talk or say or do, but how people can take these ideas and practices and make them their own and have them be useful and relevant in their everyday work. And that can, in some very small ways, help create a better world.
Then over time, they notice, like in a hospital, they notice different things happening, and they start asking, what are you doing? What's happening? So I think it's just a process, and I let people ask, because I don't think they have to know it, to know this way of being. They're curious, and they start to see it working, and people like it, clients like it.
And what my words for what you're saying is that you live your beliefs and values.
Yes.
You live the philosophical stance, and that you're not trying to judge another professional's perspective or convert
Yes, don't try to convert. It
another
doesn't work.
person to your way of thinking and working. But be interested, be curious about the difference. This is their idea of staffing. Interesting, I hadn't thought about that.
Well, I can give an example. I used to work in a psychiatric hospital many years ago, and we would have staff meetings, and they would label the patients, borderline, the bad mother, and all that. And I would just not speak that language. I would start talking about my client to the presentation in a different way. And I found over time they started using the way I was talking about it. It was very interesting.
Yeah. I personally think one thing that's very important is to have a group of colleagues who are somewhat like-minded, who think and practice some way similar to the way that you do, or curious or interested in the way that you practice that's different than the way that they do, and find ways to have conversations with them, purposeful conversations. Whether you meet for coffee once a month, or however you find a way to do it, but to be in conversation with other people about your work, and to be open to be questioned about your work, so that you're continually having to find words to describe to someone else what it is you think you're thinking or think you're doing.
Every time I hear Harlene present, which is many times, it's always new and different because the audience is different and they ask different questions. So even though I might have heard her words, the questions around it are always different. And we consult with each other informally. If we get stuck with a client or have an administrative question, we'll call and say, help, what do you think? And we just converse about it. So that's...
Yeah, and I think being respectful, because we're very different. We're very different. But I think we're respectful of those differences.
Yeah, when we do workshops together, like on coaching, I want handouts and organization and what are we doing next? And Harlene's like, Diana, don't worry. And I think I've learned to let go more with her over time. I don't know what you've learned from me, but it's very respectful, whatever it is. And we have fun together. I think having fun with your colleagues.
Maybe to do my handouts one more time.
Yeah.
Oui, ponga en filmar una y integra. Puedes poner en videos y una